Welcome, everyone, and good morning to another fact and fun-filled session of Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. This is our June update, and we are going to be talking about boxwoods today. So we're going to learn about the pests and plant diseases of boxwoods, and then some alternatives that you can plant instead. We'll finish up with bolos, which are be on the lookout, and a few announcements of upcoming learning opportunities and other things you'll definitely want to stick around to hear about. We're excited to have you all here today, and we're going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to turn it over to Matt Bertone and Mike Munster with the NC State Plant Disease and Insect Clinic, and they're going to tell us all about boxwood pests and plant diseases that we find here in North Carolina landscapes. So welcome, Matt and Mike. I'm going to stop my share so you can start yours.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Matt, is it all right if I go first here?
Yeah, go for it.
Let me do that. Let's see, I'm working from a computer that I don't normally use for plants, pests, and pathogens, so hopefully this will work. Sharing screen. There it is. All right. So for those of you who may not have been participating in previous sessions this year, one of our ideas is that we talk about, this was Charlotte's brainchild here, of saying, we're giving suggestions about what to plant in place of some of the things that are quite used or overused in our landscapes. And so Matt and I feature the problem side of things, and then Charlotte talks about the alternative sides. So today being boxwoods, I want to just highlight a few of the key diseases that we see on boxwood in North Carolina landscapes. And I'm going to start out with a kind of a repeat of a slide that I did when we talked about the Cupressaceae, the arborvitaes and lemons and so forth. So back then we were highlighting what was number 4 on this list as our 4th most popular, but today it's our number 1 woody ornamental that we received in the clinic last year. So it is very popular, of course, but it also has quite a few problems, so it gets submitted to us pretty frequently. And I'm going to begin this with a quiz here. So let's see, I launch a poll of A through D and ask this question: of these 4 photographs, which one is a foliar disease? So there may be diseases here, there may be other problems, but only one of them is an actual foliar disease on these boxwoods. So I'll give you a moment to think about that and select your answer from A through D in the poll. Looks like got a good start here with 32 people having responded so far. Good to see all the activity and interest today. Give it about another 15 seconds or so. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's stop it there with 60 responses. And it appears that the most popular result there was B. Well, let's go through these and see what the answers really were. A turns out to be damage from lesion nematodes in the roots. Those boxwoods are at a garden at the vet school here on campus, and they had very high populations of lesion nematodes there in the soil, damaging the roots. We'll talk about nematodes as one of the problems that we do see on boxwood quite often. B, even though it was the most popular answer there, is not a disease. This is an example of damage caused by an insect, boxwood leafminer. So we'll have to wait for Matt for more about that. C, this is not a disease at all either. This is damage from cold injury having injured the lower stem, and also from high soluble salts in the soil. So the correct answer, in fact, was D, which is our, I want to say old friend, because it's neither old nor a friend, boxwood blight. So just a quick overview of the few diseases that I'll be mentioning today. Below the ground, we worry about Phytophthora root rot and about nematodes, as I alluded to earlier. And then above ground, we'll do a quick review of boxwood blight, and then some points about boxwood stem canker, and a quick mention of something called volutella blight. Now, those of you who've been regulars on Plants, Pests, and Pathogens know that I almost talk about Phytophthora and armillaria in the same breath. And when we were talking about things like leylands and arborvitaes, you've really got to consider both of those as potential problems. But with boxwood, it's much more unbalanced. And I looked back at the data from 2008 to the present in boxwoods and landscapes. And if this were a football game, there would be no contest here. There were 119 Phytophthora diagnoses racked up on boxwoods during that time, but only 7 for armillaria. So when you've got a root rot problem with boxwood, then Phytophthora is going to be your first hypothesis. And here are a couple of photographs. You can have the entire shrub affected, or you can have just sections of it. As you see here, the foliage will turn a kind of a grayish green and wilts. Then it can turn brown. Eventually, of course, the whole shrub can be affected. And you'll see in the smaller plant there from the nursery, the decay on the roots, the darkening of the roots, although there aren't that many foliar symptoms yet in this particular instance. So the most common species of Phytophthora on boxwoods is one called Phytophthora nicotianae. And this is an oomycete, or a water mold, so functionally like a fungus, but unrelated to the true fungi. It's favored by excess moisture and has swimming spores at one stage in its life cycle. So that's one of the reasons why we want to avoid standing water, overwatering, and so forth when we're trying to combat or prevent Phytophthora root rot. And just a quick reminder that we do have a publication about managing Phytophthora that's been diagnosed in your landscape with recommendations of cultural practices such as increasing the organic matter, raising the level above grade, and then some recommendations of plants you can use in place of those that succumb to Phytophthora. Also, Inga Meadows had a presentation earlier this year on some of the bedding plants that can be used in those cases. They have a more recent publication based on the work that they did with beds that were intentionally infested with Phytophthora. But resuming the boxwood underground problem theme here, the nematodes, it turns out there are 3 different kinds that we deal with in boxwood in North Carolina. And in order of popularity, lesion nematodes, or Pradolenchus species, are the ones that we find the most. Now I say we, but basically it's our practice. And we have a boxwood sample and a couple of other shrubs to automatically forward some of that soil and those roots to the nematode assay laboratory at the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, who do the elucidation and the enumeration of the nematodes there. And so that's why it's really important whenever you're sending in any kind of a boxwood sample for diagnosis, unless you just want an up or down on boxwood blight, if you want a diagnosis of what the problem is, to be sure and include some of those fine roots, a good generous fistful in about a quart of soil. So the lesion nematode gets its name from the lesions that it produces on the roots, as you can see in the inset photograph there with a healthy root on the right. And typically, the the foliage of boxwood will turn a sort of a bronze color, an orangish color. You saw that in the photograph in the pre-quiz there. That's I won't say that's going to be 100% of the time, but that's something you should suspect when you see that kind of bronze in the foliage. Spiral nematode, there's a particular one that's Buxophilus, of course, meaning a lover of Buxus, that we also see frequently, or at least not uncommonly. And then in third place, the root knot nematode, which it was interesting. In the next slide here, you can see a small hedge of boxwood. This was actually in Aguascalientes in Mexico when I lived there, just outside the building where the plant pathology lab was. And you wouldn't really suspect any kind of a root problem there, but I'm sure these would have grown more vigorously if they had not had the infestation of nematodes in the roots. And it's also interesting that the swellings, the galling on the plant were not that dramatic. It's not like you would see, for example, on okra. Got a picture in the bolos of some root knot in okra a little bit later. I hope nobody has eaten before seeing that, because it's not very pleasant. But in this case, the galling, depending on the host, it's going to be either large or small. In this case, it was rather small. So moving then to the foliar, boxwood issues. Of course, we've talked about boxwood blight many times here, caused by the fungus now known as Kalanectria pseudonaviculata. It first arrived in North Carolina and in North America in 2011, so we haven't had it that long. And it's got some fairly characteristic symptoms. So just to go over those one more time, on the left there, the dark brown leaf spots visible on both sides of the leaf. They can be at the tip, as they're seen here in this photograph, but they don't always occur at the tip. And as you can see in one of them, in the older portion of the spot, they can sort of fade to a lighter tannish color rather than the original dark color. Notice too that it has a fairly sharply defined margin on that leaf spot. In the middle photograph, you see two of the other important symptoms, one being the dark streaks on the green twigs, and the other being the defoliation or loss of those leaves. That typically starts in the lower part of the plant and moves upward so that you get a top-heavy sort of look. So it seems that if you have 2 out of 3 of these, if you're seeing the leaf spots, let's say, plus the twig streaks or the twig streaks plus the defoliation, any 2 out of these 3, and you've got a pretty good diagnosis. Now, there are some exceptions. Sometimes, as you see in the photograph on the right, the leaves will die but not get the spot on them. And there's actually the fungus growing on it. That's what we look for confirmation in the lab, either by incubation or culturing. And so it can vary a little bit, but you're going to be in pretty good shape just using the rule of thumb, the 2 out of 3 of those typical symptoms, and you'll have your diagnosis. And of course, we're here for any kind of confirmation that you may need based on the actual observation of the fungus. You don't want to assume just because you see some kind of fungal growth on the foliage of boxwood that it's going to necessarily be boxwood blight.
Hey, Mike, we've had a couple of people comment that they're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. Could you move? Is there a way you can move closer, maybe to where the mic is on your device, or
sure, yeah,
anything you can adjust?
How is this? Is this any better?
Yeah, that's definitely coming through louder. Yeah, that does
sorry?
sound better. Thank you.
Is it the volume or the
Yeah.
quality of the sound that's the issue?
Yeah, we've had comments about both. So some scratchiness and static, and then also just volume.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I am in the lab here, and we're still required to wear masks. So you're hearing a little bit of the muffling from the mask that I'm wearing.
All right, thanks. But you are better now. You're definitely coming through louder and clearer. Thank you.
All right. Yep. And I apologize. I'm not seeing again, with the way I got the screen set up here, I'm not seeing the comments, so thanks for interrupting. So another fairly new problem on boxwoods that we've had, just getting nostalgic here. It used to be, it seems to me back in like the late 90s when I first started working in the clinic, you would just throw away the boxwood foliage and stems because there weren't problems on them. If you were looking for problems, it would be down low, base of the main stems or in the roots and soil. But now we do have to be aware of some of these things. So boxwood stem canker, also new. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but this is another fungus called Cooperative Theobromicula, and its typical symptom would be individual branches or parts of branches where the leaves turn a yellowish color, but they hang on. They don't drop off, at least at first. And if you take a look here at this set of branches, you can see the individual cankers that have girdled those twigs that then died from that point forward. And now in this particular photo, you can see that there is some defoliation going on there as well. But notice the importance of it being branch by branch or a section of branch only, instead of the whole section of the shrub or the whole shrub. Another important clue that you have boxwood stem canker is if you peel off the bark and look at the wood, it's a very dark color, almost a black color underneath. And that you will find, you have to look for the area where the actual canker is down at the base of the dead portion. And that's a good clue that you've got boxwood stem canker. Again, in the lab, we would confirm this by looking for the actual fungus incubating in the moist chamber. If you look higher up on this plant, you will also see what looks like some kind of fungal growth on the leaves. You can't see it on the stems, but it also occurs there. That is not the Polytotrica. That is another fungus, Volutella, that we don't really talk about much. I've only talked about it on this program in terms of a different Volutella that gets on Echosandra, but this one is an opportunistic invader of boxwood tissue. So we'll see it on plants, for example, that have drought stress, or in this particular case, where the stem was girdled by the boxwood stem canker, and then the Volutella appears, often with a sort of a pale orange color to it on the leaves and stems. Here's a little bit of a close-up, a little bit blurry there, but you can kind of see the Volutella on the underside of those leaves, and also on some of the stems, the twigs. So that is a quick review of some of our key boxwood disease problems. And let me go ahead and relaunch that poll. Well, not the same poll, a different poll, asking this question. The picture here is a boxwood. It's our kind of poster child from the beginning of the presentation here. But based on what you've seen now, which of these do you think is most likely happening in this boxwood topiary? Is it boxwood blight, stem canker, Phytophthora root rot, or nematode injury? So we'll give folks a little bit of time here. And right now, of course, you can't see it, but there is one that is in the lead, although it is a fairly contested race among the other three. But the one in the lead, I am happy to say, is the correct answer. So if you know what other people are saying, jump on the bandwagon. If you have no way of communicating, then just see what you think this might be based on what we talked about. So give this another 10 seconds or so. Hopefully we can get at least 60 folks, which is the number who had replied on the previous poll. And we're up to 57, so 58, 59, 60 brave folks have answered. So let's go ahead and close it out. share those results. So fairly substantial lead there with C, which is in fact the correct answer. This is Phytophthora root rot. How did we get to that conclusion? Let's see. But I had a, there it is. So we can rule out boxwood blight fairly easily here because it would be less concentrated in just one spot if it were this severe. And you don't see it working its way up from the lower portion of the plant up to the top. Stem canker, likewise, it wouldn't be that whole section there, at least not as your first guess. You would think that it would go to individual branches first on the plant. Although the idea that the leaves are hanging on and yellow, that is kind of a boxwood stem canker characteristic. Definitely not like boxwood blight because this much leaf death and you would see a lot more defoliation. So Phytophthora root rot, that's a good one. It's localized in the soil, so it's not going to move around that much. And it's taking out a section like this of the plant, the stems from the soil upward. So nematode entry, that's probably not a bad guess, except that I didn't say this earlier, but you wouldn't expect it to be quite this destructive like the Phytophthora is. So very good. And with that, I will stop sharing unless there are some questions here. Now, since I stopped sharing, I can read the chat.
Mike, most of our conversation thus far has just been about technology and getting the poll and all that kind of good stuff, participating in the poll. The very last comment is asking about treatment, but you covered many different things in this section, and we'll have some fact sheets to link people to in the follow-up email.
Yes, unfortunately, there isn't much treatment for these. The one exception, and I should have mentioned this earlier too. Charlotte asked me the question yesterday, or asked both Matt and me. What we're talking about, is this applied to all species of Buxus, or is it going to vary? And I don't know of any differences in susceptibility to these problems except for boxwood blight. So there are definitely differences there, with the American and the English boxwoods being the most susceptible, some of the other species being less so, and there are some now marketed specifically for having some resistance, which I believe they do. I haven't seen recent information on that. The next gen boxwoods, you may have heard of those. So that's a case where you do have options for less susceptible plants to use after you remove those that have been damaged so much by boxwood blight. It's not that the blight's going to kill them, but they're going to look very unsightly. Unfortunately, when the conditions are really favorable, so a lot of rain, especially, you can get even some of the less susceptible types of boxwoods showing a lot of damage. So there's no guarantee there. We haven't quite, I don't think, crossed the line where we would give up on trying to eliminate the boxwoods and just try and settle into a fungicide management program. But that is an option with where you would apply, basically the homeowner's availability would be chlorothalonil for treating as a preventive for infections of boxwood blight. So your goal is to protect the new foliage. Of course, it's going to be, repeated applications to make sure that that foliage is protected, because it will eventually, break down. And so, yeah, it's not an easy answer. With the others, I don't know that there's anything off the top of my head that a homeowner would use for the stem canker. So there you would want to just prune those out. Make sure you go several inches into the clean wood. Make sure you sanitize your pruners and not do it on a wet day where you're going to be moving those spores around, because those are actually both boxwood blight and boxwood stem canker. Those spores are going to be rather sticky, so they're going to be moving by, for example, by water splash, but also by human activity. Nematodes, once they're in the soil, then you're going to have to live with them. So there it's a question of finding some kind of plant that would not be affected. So if you have root knot nematode, one of your options is actually azaleas. We talked about options to azaleas before and how they get stunt nematode, but they're actually a choice. And I've done this myself, where an area with root knot nematode, you would choose that. I believe that the Camellia japonicas are also an option where you've had root knot nematode. Lesion nematode is a little harder because it's got a wider host range. The boxwood spiral nematode is probably going to be specific to boxwood, so you would have a lot of choices there. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit as far as what you would use for management of some of these diseases.
Yes, thank you, Mike. And Charlotte did just put a good link in the chat. I would ask you, would you mind just popping in the chat, Mike, the name of that fungicide product that you just mentioned? I know we'll be getting a question on that one.
Well, I tell you, it's here, I can do that. It's chlorothalonil.
Excellent, thank you.
That's the name of the chemical itself. So that's going to be available under many different brand names now. It's off patent.
Okay.
Also,
okay, great.
I also want to strongly recommend folks look at the Virginia Boxwood Blight Task Force. Let me type that in too, even though I don't have the URL off the top of my head. But Virginia. Those folks did a really good job a few years ago of assembling experts and interested parties to put together a set of best management practices for not just homeowners, but let's say historical sites, for nurseries that have had boxwood blight, for nurseries that haven't had it. So there's a lot of information there that the folks just north of us have made available online.
Terrific, that catches us up, Mike. Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
Matt, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Okay. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, you sound good.
Good. Okay. Let me start sharing. All right. Of course, I'm going to talk about some arthropod pests of boxwoods. Luckily, boxwoods don't get a ton. They get a good variety, but they don't get a ton of really important pests, at least that damage them as much as some of those diseases that Mike mentioned. So I'm going to go probably from the most common to the least common pests and how to ID them, and a little bit about control. The first one I would say is the most common is the boxwood mites or boxwood spider mites. These are a true spider mite related to the two-spotted spider mite, a common pest of many plants. But these are specific. These are Uritetranicus buxi. These are, as the name suggests, these are specific to boxwoods, to Buxus. The mites themselves are rarely seen actually, but the damage is very common. That's because these mites are fairly cool season active, so they're going to be active in the very early spring and the late fall. You know, when it's cooler out and when it's very hot, you're not going to find them, but you will see this damage. Now I'll show you the critters in the next slide, but the eggs are yellow, flat, barrel-shaped with ridges in a stipe, which is a small hair-like process. This is not found in, say, the two-spotted spider mite. But it's really the damage that's very distinct. Even though you don't see the mites, basically their feeding damage will cause these little chicken scratches or little stippling. It's very noticeable in this dark green, the leaves of this dark green variety with these very yellow, looks like somebody took a needle or a pin and just scratch the surfaces. With more chlorotic species or you know, ones that are more yellow or chlorotic because of other reasons, the stippling is less noticeable. But basically, if you've got all these little pinpricks or stipple spots on the leaves, that's a good sign for boxwood spider mites. Now, they won't kill the plants typically, but they can make them look unsightly. And there are some chemicals that can be used for them by the homeowner. But basically, like I said, they're not common during certain parts of the year. So you really have to scout for the mites themselves when it's cooler out. Or else you're just going to be seeing the damage and not the actual mites. Now, what the mites look like are here. These are, this is a female here on the left, a little rounder and shorter legged. This long-legged male mite right here has a pointed abdomen tip. And this male mite is sitting by some eggs and some fresh eggs and also some shed skins and eggshells. So oftentimes when you have the damage, you can flip over the leaves and find the shed skins and the eggshells. They're these little white crinkly things. But you won't see these. In fact, these are the only ones I've ever seen of the many boxwoods I've diagnosed with boxwood mite damage. So again, the mites themselves are fairly rare to see. And again, the timing of control is important to actually get them while they're actually active. Okay, the next most common boxwood pest, Mike alluded to in one of the earlier quiz, is the boxwood leaf miner. So this is a gall midge in the family Cecidomyidae. It's Monarthropalpus flavus. Again, only on boxwood. This is specific to Buxus species. The adults are small and orange midges, and I'll show you them in a second. And they're called leaf miners because they do live in between, the larvae live in between the leaves surfaces. So they're not like a typical gall midge where they cause a really gaudy gall or growth on the plant. But they cause these blister-like galls. So they cause little, sometimes discoloration and these little puffy or little blistery things, sometimes barely noticeable, but if you look at the leaves just right, you can see them pretty well. They typically fly and mate around March or April when the new growth begins. But for the rest of the year, they're going to spend inside the leaf as the larva. And so they only have one generation per year. Again, the spring adults emerging from the previous year's generation and mating, laying eggs, and developing. Now, again, another pest that doesn't really kill the plants, but it can make them look bad. There are some controls out there. Let me skip to the next slide. So this is actually this is a video of when they actually are swarming. This was in April of the year that it was happening. And it might be hard to see or not, I'm not sure, but you can see these little tiny midges flying around the boxwood, like little mosquitoes almost. And this is the best time to treat for the adults. So contact pesticide can work on the leaves. When the adults land, they'll come in contact with them. Otherwise, the plants are pretty well protected. And so you'll have to, let's go to the next slide. You'll have to use a systemic insecticide if you have them. So here's a female after she's emerged and mated. She uses this very sharp little ovipositor to inject eggs into the leaves. And the larvae are these legless maggots that develop throughout the year inside the hollow boxwood leaf. So again, fairly common. Look for those blisters, and those are the boxwood leaf miners. Okay, now another major, not really major, but another pest of boxwood, but it's not super common, although it is well known, is the boxwood psyllid. So it's in the family Psyllidae and Psylla buxi, again, specific to boxwood, as most psyllids are host specific to their plants they feed on. In fact, this plant here I just noticed has some boxwood spider mite feeding right there. There's those chicken scratches, but we're really going to be looking at these cupped leaves. So it's the only species on boxwood in our state. There's another species of psyllid up in the New England area on boxwood as well, but it looks very different as adults. The nymphs produce a wax filament and honeydew, and I'll show that in a minute. And the nymphal feeding causes the cupping of the new growth. So you can see here, these leaves are kind of cupped over each other, and inside there are the actual psyllid nymphs. Now, again, it's mostly aesthetic damage, and there are various control tactics, but chemical control is rarely warranted. So you can just leave them be, and their populations may not be as bad the next year, or it can be simply once you start to see this cupping on the new growth, just trim out or prune out those sections and destroy them, and that'll remove the population from the area. So basically, you get them before they grow up. They can't mate and reproduce and lay eggs, so you can remove them from there. And just so you know what you're seeing, when you open up these curled leaves, you'll see a little nymphs, these little green insects that usually have this waxy coating and a waxy filament coming out the back end. And basically, again, it looks like actually this boxwood has several. These may even be, these are probably boxwood leafminer. So this one had a lot of things going on with it. But anyway, the boxwood psyllids cause this cupping of the growth of the new growth, especially. Okay, I saw that there might be some things in the chat. I can't see the chat right now. Is there anything pressing that questions that I should answer, or?
No, Matt, nothing pressing. I've just been popping a few NCSU fact sheets in there.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so those are basically the three major pests of boxwoods. Really, those are going to be the most common arthropod pests of boxwoods. But I will mention a few others. So boxwood bud mites, this is an areophyid mite. These little worm-like, very tiny mites of about 1/4 millimeter long. But you can see actually one here, there's a boxwood bud, and that little tiny thing is one of these mites. So areophyes, canistrinii, these are specific to Buxus sempervirens. And like I said, they're minute worm-like mites, and they infest the developing buds where they cause it to cup and deform, similar to the boxwood psyllid, but much more drastic. The mites feed inside the affected foliage, and they're not very common. This is the only one I've ever seen, and I was fortunate enough to get a nice colony there and take some pictures. I asked Jim Baker, who you will be hearing from later this year, and he's an emeritus faculty member in our department, very knowledgeable of these. He has this photo from 1980 showing this really distorted growth from these mites. Otherwise, he had not seen that since. So it's really not a very common pest, but it can occur on boxwoods, and we've gotten it in at least once since I've been here. So again, not very common, but just to be on the lookout for and be aware of. Now, of course, there are some scales on boxwoods, but these are rarely a huge issue. So there are various ones, but not known to cause much damage. And honestly, they seem to be probably more common in stressed or a declining boxwoods where they don't have the defenses. So although there are a lot of species that can affect boxwood, we don't see them very often, or when we do, the boxwoods maybe fine then with low populations of the scales, or maybe suffering and they'll have more scales on them. The most ones I see most of the time are these oyster shell type of various species of armored scales on the stems. But again, unless you're looking at the plants because there's something wrong, you rarely notice them, and they rarely cause major damage. We also sometimes get wax scales on them, which are kind of look like little white bits of chewing gum on them. They may be more abundant, like I said, in stress plants, but as you can see, it's not uncommon. There's 75 scales associated with Buxus. So some of these are in the native range, some of these are here, but really there's a lot of diversity that can get on them, but they're really typically not a major issue of boxwoods. Whenever I see them, they're basically secondary. I'll mention them, but it's usually something else causing the issues. And now one of the really big things to mention is a boxwood bolo. So be on the lookout for box tree moth. And this is one of the most important pests of boxwood. And this is one of the major reasons we're presenting on this today, is because there was a recent announcement from the USDA that material with these moths was sent to the US. So we are on the lookout for this moth. So this is a crambid, which is a snout moth, Cytolema prospectalis. It is native to East Asia, where many Buxus are native, and in their native range, they're not much of an issue. But with the commerce with Europe, it was found in Germany in 2006 and very quickly spread in Europe. Now, Europe does have native boxwoods as well. And so it not only affected regular plantings in urban or suburban areas, but also they have a lot of wild populations of the plant. And so these moths were able to spread very quickly. Now, they were first detected in North America in Toronto, Canada in 2018 by some moth photographer, just took a photo and people recognized that it was something new to the region. And unfortunately, because it's now kind of established in Canada, there was some recent infested materials from Canada shipped to the US. And so there's been a very high alert about this pest because it's very destructive. All the pests I talked about today are fairly benign. They can cause some issues with how the boxwood looks, but they rarely ever kill it or do anything really serious. But as you'll see, this is a really serious pest. Now, I'll mention this a little bit later too. They come in two different forms. This is a very rare form, the dark form, but this is the typical light form. And the eggs are scale-like and laid on the leaves of the boxwood. They look a lot like some other moth eggs, but you really wouldn't have any moths laying eggs on boxwood around here unless it's over some grass or something like that. So that's the first sign. The young larvae feed on the undersides and make small windows. And as they grow, they consume most of the leaf except for the midrib and sometimes the edges that are a little thicker, as you'll see in a second, and spin a lot of silk. So the plants will be covered with lots of silk and dead and chewed out leaves. They pupate in the plant among the silk, and there's several generations per year. The larvae are really distinct. They have this really shiny black head. There's very green body with long dark stripes and alternating stripes along it. Really, there's no caterpillars that you'll really find in boxwood around here. So if you see caterpillars eating boxwood, definitely take photos, definitely send us some things, because some photos or specimens, because that would be very worrisome. I don't post in here, but I have found caterpillars, very dark caterpillars, small caterpillars, feeding on dead leaves and webbing up and creating frass in the middle of a boxwood, but they only eat the dead leaves that fall out of the plant, and you won't see any damage to the green leaves, like I'll show you in a second. So actually, here's what the damage looks like. You can see it's basically defoliated. You get these little curlicues kind of all around because they've basically fed upon the whole leaf, but left either the midrib or the edges of the leaf intact. And so you get all this kind of curly appearance, but basically defoliated, and major areas of boxwood plantings, especially in Europe right now, are being completely defoliated. And they obviously, with all that defoliation, can kill the plants fairly easily. So this is definitely a pest we want to be on the lookout for and make sure it does not establish here. Now, again, the adults are typical crabbed moth. They have actually some close relatives here in the US already, many of them which are actually non-native as well. But again, there's this light form and the dark form. So here are two similar ones. This is the box tree moth that I'm talking about now, but there's also the melonworm moth, which one we have, Diphaenia hyalinata, and they are here, and they can be pests of gardens and things like that, but they are not a boxwood pest, and they look very similar. But I was wondering if anybody in the chat wants to mention what they see the difference. Okay, Charlotte has, what are the size of the adult moths? Yeah, so the wingspan is about 1.5 inches or so. So they're a medium-sized moth. They're kind of, if you've seen a melonworm or anything like that, they're about the same size. They're kind of a medium-sized moth, and they hold their wings out like that kind of jet fighter jet kind of thing. So anybody see any differences here? How you can tell the difference between the two? And you can type it in the chat. So the end growth. So actually, that little the little puff of scales on the melonworm is from the females, actually push out those scales to emit pheromones to attract the males. So the angle of the antennae, nope, that's they're very similar. The head, the black, yellow in the head, the color. So okay, just letting you look at these and try and figure it out yourself. It's like one of those barroom games where you just look at the differences between the pictures. So here's what you should be looking for. So the first difference is, and this is found in the dark, the dusky forms too, is they have these little appendages called these little commas coming out of the white on the wings. So they have these little kind of curves, little kind of spike coming out. Also, the white breaks up this brown border where it meets the head. So in the melonworm, you're going to have this much thicker brown border in the front. In the Boxwood Tree Moth, it's going to be white all the way up to the head. So those are the two major differences between these. There are some other similar-ish looking moths, but really the melonworm is probably going to be the one that would be most mistaken for it. Again, though, if you're suspicious of any of these that look like this, you can always send photos to us. That's all I have for the pests of boxwoods. Charlotte, do you want to, before we go into the rest of the stuff, do you want to do yours now?
Sure. The plant these instead?
Yeah. And we'll come back.
We will do that.
And Mike, if you don't mind, I might come back first and do my stuff.
Go for it.
Okay, it's all you, Charlotte.
All right, thank you. Let me get my screen share going. Okay, so we are on to talking about alternatives for boxwood, because we have heard there's some serious disease issues we can't do a lot about, potential serious new pest issue, which hopefully we can prevent from becoming established here. But anytime you have serious problems or even reoccurring problems on a certain plant, an option is always to plant something else. And a lot of times that's the best option long-term and most sustainable option. So we're going to talk about alternatives for boxwood. And as Mike alluded, there's more than one species. There's what we commonly call the American boxwood, which is actually native to Europe. And then what is called the English boxwood is just a cultivar of the American boxwood. And then there are these other, the little leaf boxwood, the Japanese boxwood, Korean boxwood, so from Asia. And so we're going to look at some things that are alternatives for this, but in general, all of these boxwoods look really similar. Their growth habit may be a little different. Some are more rounded. You see the one in the picture is an upright form. The Asian species tend to be a little faster growing. But one thing that's always a good ID tip for boxwoods is that they have opposite leaves. So hollies have alternate leaves, and there's some hollies that have these little small green leaves, which it's easy to confuse. And a lot of times people will call or contact your extension office and say, I have boxwoods. Anything with a little green leaf, may lead people to think it's a boxwood. So you might want to get some pictures for sure to make sure you are dealing with boxwood. But you can see here, this is a close-up of the American boxwood foliage. And when we talk about opposite leaves, we're looking at leaves are attached directly opposite each other on either side of the stem. So that's a great ID tip for boxwood, the opposite leaves. Whereas hollies will have alternate leaves. So there'll be one leaf at one point, and then you have to move up the stem to see the next leaf. And I mentioned that because everything we're looking at today, whoops, went back a little too far, are also great alternatives for Japanese hollies. So Japanese hollies have some serious problems, and they're often planted, for something with small kind of evergreen, small leaf evergreen. So if you're having problems with Japanese hollies, the things we're looking at today would also be good options. Just zip past that again. All right. So probably the most indestructible plant in the southern landscape is yaupon. And there are a couple of different dwarf varieties out there. If you ever look across a parking lot and see a variety of small evergreen shrubs with small green leaves, and some are dying and some are thriving, look closer, and I guarantee the thriving ones are dwarf yaupon, the dying ones are Japanese hollies. And dwarf yaupon is actually native to the southeastern Atlantic and Gulf coasts. It occurs across along North Carolina's shore, so it's hardy to around zone 7A. And most of the time in the landscape, we do use these dwarf forms, and they tend to grow usually 2 to 4 feet tall over time, definitely getting closer to the 3 to 4 feet tall and 3 to 5 feet wide. So they're not quite the same growth habit as your boxwoods, which tend to be a little more upright. These are a little more widespreading. But they will take all levels of torture if you want to prune them, you know, stepping in them, all kinds of things they tend to recover from them. I think if you tried really, really hard, you could drown them, but it would take a long term of inundation. Otherwise, they're extremely tough, very drought tolerant, especially once they're established. So you see in the picture, one of the popular varieties, Bordeaux, has a little bit of a reddish tint to the new growth. Close up of the foliage on Nana, just these kind of small green leaves, and they have that alternate arrangement on the stem. So the toughest of the tough dwarf yaupon. If you are looking for something that has a little bit more of the upright habit, inkberry could be an option. So inkberries are another species of holly. They're Ilex glabra, and they do have that more upright habit. And one thing, though, with some of the more compact varieties, so in the wild, and this is actually another one that's native across North Carolina and much of the eastern United States, or the eastern seaboard. And in the wild, they are a bit more open and kind of sparse, especially if they're in some shade. But some of the selected varieties, especially when grown in sun, can be quite compact and full. But they do have a tendency to get a little open and leggy at the base. You can see the cultivar in the picture is shamrock, and that's pretty typical of its growth habit. These being a holly, they do have those typical holly flowers, and the female plants, of course, will bear a small fruit. And the reason this plant's called inkberry is because it's a little dark colored fruit. Like other hollies, they're separate male and female plants. So these varieties that have been around a while, like shamrock and nigra, they're good plants to have in the landscape. They're a little larger. And I just have found out about these two new cultivars. I have not seen them myself. I was just reading about them over the weekend, and they sound really interesting, so it would be worthwhile checking out. They are very compact dwarf varieties, been introduced by proven winners. There's one named Strong Box and one named Jim Box. So it's a little confusing. They aren't boxwoods, they are inkberries, but they've been given these names with box in the name. And they are reported to grow only about 2 to 3 feet by 2 to 3 feet. So it'd be very interesting to try some of those out if you've got a demonstration garden there at your extension center, and find some of these that you could put in the landscape. It'd be great to see how they grow and in the landscape over time and hear about that. So be on the lookout for inkberry and these new varieties. Something a little bit different, maybe not quite as common as yaupon for sure, but a little similar looking is a type of viburnum, Viburnum obovatum. This one is a viburnum that's from South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. This variety, specifically Ralston's hardy, does look quite similar to a yaupon at this time of the year. As you can see in the picture on the lower left, these are actually at my house. This is what I have in front of the foundation. And similar to yaupon, the natural form of Viburnum obovatum tends to be open and more upright and tree-like, but these dwarf varieties have been found and have been cultivated, and there's actually more out there. Ralston's hardy was selected by the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, but Miss Schiller's Delight, World Class, Riefler's Dwarf, or other dwarf ones. And the big difference between this, excuse me, and yaupon is this has flowers. It is a type of viburnum. So you can see the blooms in early April. They're little small white flowers in clusters. I've never had fruit form on mine, but with viburnums, they typically need cross-pollination with another cultivar. They're often not self-fertile in a individual cultivar, so maybe that might be the reason we don't see any fruit on these. And the other thing I've noticed is they can sucker a little bit, which these are plants native to kind of swampy areas, and that's not uncommon. Inkberry will do the same. Yaupon can even do the same. So you may get little suckers coming up around the base, which are pretty easy to control by just cutting them out or taking a shovel or spade or cutting them out. But it's been a really interesting shrub, and I do recommend it. It's hardy to zone 7A, but in really cold winters, it can defoliate. In fact, when I bought these plants from a nursery, they were on special because it was after that winter we had that was super cold, and I think that may have been 2015, 2016, where it stayed below freezing for a week. So they were completely defoliated. They looked a little rough, but I put them in the ground, and they've never stopped growing since then. And we hadn't had one of those cold winters since then, so they've stayed quite evergreen. So something a little different to look out for. And then another one, kind of new on the market, the Distiliums. These have really just exploded over the last few years with a lot of different cultivars. This is a plant from Asia, and it is a really interesting textural evergreen. There are two different species, and the individual species aren't grown that much, but the hybrids between the two have shown a lot of promise and are proving to be quite tough shrubs. They are susceptible to Phytophthora. The inkberry we looked at is also susceptible to Phytophthora. So if you are specifically looking for something to replace boxwoods in soils where you know you have Phytophthora, this would not be an option. Yopon would definitely be an option, and then some of the plants we talked about back in April would be good options. But for other, if you are just looking for something with a little bit different for a small evergreen, or for some of the other issues we talked about with boxwood, an alternative, look for some of the Distiliums. I've listed some of the cultivars that are more compact, because there are some that are larger, kind of more upright, 6 to 8 feet tall. But the two that are pictured here just as young shrubs, Cinnamon Girl, which has a kind of a bronze cinnamon color to the new growth, and Copper Tone. Those are both smaller, kind of rounded shrubs. You can find other varieties like Vintage Jade and Blue Cascade, which both have a bluish tint. Jewel Box is a new one I haven't seen yet, but it's supposed to be very compact. Then Cast and Bronze and Magic Globe were some also ones that have been recently introduced. So if you're looking for just a durable evergreen shrub, Distilium is certainly an option. The flowers are small and kind of indescript, so it's not something you would typically plant for flowering, but more for a background. And I would definitely recommend to work with the natural shape of these. You can see how the foliage is held and the branch architecture. So if they were pruned a lot, that would kind of disrupt that. So in purchasing these plants, pay attention to the size that they're going to grow. Choose varieties that fit your space, so you don't need to do a lot of pruning, and let them grow into their natural form. All right, you can explore other plant options on the Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. If you go to the site and click on Find a Plant, you will see a whole list of options on the left side where you can narrow down plants for your specific site and needs. So under Whole Plant Traits, if you want to look for options for these evergreen shrubs with small leaves, which would be a fine texture, you would select that you're looking for a shrub, and you want it to be a broadleaf evergreen, and then for the texture, you would select fine, and you can see there's actually 42 options listed in the toolbox for that, so you can go there and look up more possibilities, and you can further narrow your search by many different factors, including where you are in North Carolina, if you're looking for something that attracts wildlife, if you want something native, and many, many other attributes. So I encourage you to check it out. Also should mention that all of the plants that are in these slides are archived. So there's an archive of the slides that you can visit, and where you see the names of the plants linked, that will take you to the profile for that plant in the plant toolbox.
Thank you, Charlotte.
All
That was
right.
great.
And, yep. With that, we'll turn it. Oh, go ahead.
Could I give just one comment? Minda mentions that Viburnum obovatum, Mrs. Schiller's Delight, is a cultivar that's doing well for her. I've heard of that one as well. And the one question we had is with some of these cultivars like Shamrock, what is the male pollinator? Would that just be a straight species Ilex glabra that you need nearby? What would you think about that?
Actually, I'm pretty sure Shamrock is a male cultivar. I'd have to look it up, but I'm almost sure Shamrock is male. But inkberry is pretty common. If you're in the coastal plain or the Piedmont, you know, it's a pretty common plant in the wild. So if you had male or female, pollinators do work it. In fact, like all hollies, bees love it. So you'll get a lot of bee activity on inkberry when it's in bloom. But I think most of the named cultivars for the dwarf varieties we were looking at are male. So you're not likely to get berries. I'd have to look it up to make sure, but in general, most of the time, the selections are for male varieties. They tend to hold their foliage a little better in the hollies or berry-producing plants, whereas you see the berry-producing hollies when the fruits are ripening, that's getting a lot of priority for nutrients, and so you're getting yellow leaves and leaves dropping. But I do know there is a female variety of dwarf yaupon named Rudolph. I believe something like Rudolph. We did talk about it in our April session. So if you did want something small that had berries, you could look for that dwarf yaupon. Taylor's Rudolph actually is the full name of that cultivar.
Excellent, thank you. And we are all caught up.
All right, yeah, that was a great question. And thank you, Minda, for sharing about the Miss Schiller's Delight. So it's good to know that one's blooming well and doing well in addition to the Ralston's Hardy.
Well, thanks, Charlotte.
And
yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to start off with this. I've got a couple more things to do before we actually get into our real bolos. But first thing, I wanted to share something interesting that was really nice to get. So this was from Tom Glasgow in Craven County. Sent these. I don't know if anybody has any idea what these things are, and some soil associated with some warm season grasses. But these were really surprising. He sent me some photos, and I didn't recognize them at first. I was like, I'm not sure what those are. Could be springtails, could be something else. But these are, in fact, newborn ground pearls. So these are Margarodidae crawlers. So the crawler stage, the first instars of the ground pearls, which are a type of scale insect. These little crawlers are the ones that go and latch onto roots, and they crawl into the root, pierce the root and start feeding, and then they become the form that we're more used to when dealing with this pest of warm season grasses. And just looking at the slide mounted specimens, I had to slide mount them just to make sure, but you can very obviously see the mouth parts, the scale mouth parts. They have this long kind of sucking, this muscular and piercing area, and then these stylets, these long thread-like, needle-like mouth parts that pierce the plant. And what's really cool on these is that the mouth parts are almost between the middle legs, so it looks like it almost has its mouth on its belly. Really weird insects, and get even weirder as they grow older. As just a refresher, they become a cyst form. It's not the clearest picture, but this is one of why they're called ground pearls, because they look like almost like the fertilizers added, the pellets added to the to soils and to potting mixes, but they go from that first instar, they begin secreting this covering, and they live in there for a long time until they mature. And the adult females actually have this really vibrant pink critters. These look like fangs, but they're actually the front legs and are characteristic of ground pearl females, adult females. And of course, these adult females laid those eggs that hatched into those crawlers. So I just want to mention that. That was thanks to Tom for sending those to me. It was new to me, and some of our turf entomologists had never seen them before either. They're fairly uncommonly seen, those crawlers. Anyway, before we get into the official bolos, I just want to make an announcement, and this is in working with Charlotte and Caroline and Mike. For August, for our Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, we're going to be asking you to submit your photos. So we are going to be opening up, we'll send out a link for a form to fill out where you can add your photos for us to discuss. You can add up to, I think, 3 photos showing the situation and the plants and the symptoms. And we will get our answers to you and advice during the session. We'll choose, hopefully there's so many submissions that we have to choose only some of them, but we'll fill up the whole session with the whole webinar with your submitted photos that we'll look at and give you some ideas on how to tell what's going on with those plants or what type of insect it is and how to tell it. So we are very much looking forward to this interactive session in August. So we'll send around that link soon, and you can start collecting your photos or sending photos into that link and form when you can. Okay, so some bolos for July. So we're getting into the summer. I can't believe today is, or yesterday was summer, beginning of summer. It just blows my mind that we're there already. So July, so cicadas, now not the periodical cicadas that everybody's been talking about, but the annual cicadas. They come out later in the year, also called dog day cicadas because of the dog days of summer. These big, this one is newly emerged. You can see it's very pale wings or a little clouded wings because they haven't completely hardened yet. But these are typically a brown and green, a little bit of white, very large cicadas, making a lot of noise, those stereotypical summer noises in the trees. And with the cicadas are going to come the cicada killers. So again, don't mistake these for Asian giant hornets or killer or murder hornets. This I've gone over this many times before, how to tell the difference, but basically they have this long pointed abdomen. It's black with these very faint, faintly yellow, almost cream colored blotches on the base. Very large eyes, reddish body, and they do become very large wasps, over 2 inches long sometimes, of course, to be able to attack and paralyze and drag a cicada back down to its burrow. They're harmless basically to people, so just observe them. They're really interesting wasps. Other things are going to get bigger. So full-grown wheel bugs, you're going to start to see these large assassin bugs all over the place with this large cog-like or buzzsaw-like crest on the abdomen, on the thorax. Don't handle these because they can bite, but they are generalist predators of other insects. We're going to be start seeing a lot more caterpillars, including the fall webworms. Even though they're called fall webworms, they do start to appear in late summer, and they'll be creating all this webbing on the tips of branches all along highways and everywhere else. And you'll notice these inside will be numerous caterpillars. They can be pruned out if you can get to just the nest, the web. If it's so extensive like this, you can rip open some of the webbing and allow natural predators to get them, or spray nearby foliage with some approved products. But they typically, by the end of the year, the summer, the trees have gotten a lot of energy already. They can usually withstand some infestations of fall webworms. Of course, in your gardens, you could be seeing a lot of caterpillars as well. The moths have laid the eggs, or the caterpillars have come out of hibernation long ago. And so you've got these caterpillars on the plants or in the plants, including the squash vine borers inside the squash plants. This is a cross-striped cabbage worm, but you're also going to be seeing hornworms. A friend of mine actually sent classic hornworm infested with the cocoons of parasitoid wasps already on his tomatoes. You're going to be seeing armyworms and things like that. So it's just a very active time of year for all sorts of larvae and insects in general. And of course, many of the critters are getting bigger. So you're going to start noticing things like black and yellow garden spiders here, praying mantises. Again, many of these are one generation per year. And so in the spring, they're small or they're eggs. And as it starts to get warmer, they're going to become increasingly larger and mature until you start to notice them again. So summer is really the time where you start to notice these insects and spiders at their peak size. Okay, let's see. I think I see something in the chat. Okay, so here's a quick question for me, and then actually this is my last bolo, so I'll turn it over to Mike right now, actually. But I'll answer that question from the chat. So my rosemary and sage plants leaves are covered with white specks. Green coloring is gone. What is sucking them? So that's That's actually one that usually can be identified fairly easily. So if it's just white specks on the plants, as if the green is literally actually sucked out of the plants, and no other fecal matter or anything like that, that's going to be leaf hoppers. And leaf hoppers, especially Ligurian leaf hopper, I covered, I think, last year it affects members of the mint family, which is rosemary, sage, thyme, mint. So a lot of those are really desirable for those leaf hoppers. They'll sit and suck the green right out of the plants, and enough populations can cause lots of damage to these. Very difficult to control because they're very mobile and they're around for basically most of the nice times of the year. We're going to try something this year with some of ours to kind of remove these herbs to a separate potters to try and get them away from the weeds where these leaf hoppers also feed, to try to kind of remove them from other populations of the leaf hoppers. But because they're so mobile and they can fly around, they're difficult. We also have been seeing a lot of flea hoppers, which are little myriad or plant bugs, and they will cause a fairly similar damage, but they'll also leave dark fecal specks on the plants, and they are a little bit less mobile, and but they can still jump, and they look like little tiny black beetles, even though they're a true bug. So those are the most common things affecting those, and basil as well. So yeah, so exactly. Most of the herbs that people plant are going to be affected by leaf hoppers. Unfortunately, they're very tiny mobile insects that are very difficult to control on those plants. So I'll post a fact sheet and a link in the chat while Mike goes over his bolos. Okay, thank you.
You thought
Matt,
you thought I had not muted my microphone, but I just wasn't talking.
there you are.
So yes, let's do a few disease bolos. Actually, there are too many to do them all. I'm not even because of time constraints here, I'm not even going to do the flower bed bolos today, but for anyone who needs more of these, who wakes up in the middle of the night and just hasn't had enough bolos lately, remember that on our website and the menu item on the left there is a link to our list of bolos by month. You can see the list there. And I want to start out with a bolo flashback here. I think it was 2 years ago that I presented this slide. And so let's do a quick poll here of these two spots on a big leaf hydrangea. Actually, I'll get closer to the microphone here again, make sure we're coming through. So there's a large 10 colored blotch there, labeled 1, and a smaller blotch, a little bit more purplish with a light center, labeled 2. So is spot number 1 a disease, spot number 2 a disease, both or neither? And for those who were participating 2 years ago or whenever it was that I showed this, you've got the leg up on it. And if not, just see what you think. And we'll let this go another 10 or 12 seconds here while you decide. Again, this is big leaf hydrangea. And I think the photo was taken a little bit later in the year than we are at right now. All right, let's see what we got. So very good. The majority or the plurality here does have it. It is number 2. And what it is Cercospora leaf spot. So pretty much ubiquitous on hydrangea here in North Carolina. I think I've started to see some already, but we all will before the season is out. And we'll probably see some of this drought or heat stress. It does seem to, at least the ones that we grow in our yard, they do tend to flag a little bit, get a little droopy when they haven't had enough water, and there's a lot of heat and sun, so you get some of this burning on the leaves. It isn't a disease; it's just from the reaction, the plant's reaction to that stress. And as Matt mentioned, yeah, here we are in summer already. Hard to believe, but that is kind of a transition period between some of the late spring, early summer diseases that we see. Now, a lot of them aren't going to actually go away. Some of them we won't see so much, but they're joined by our high heat of the summer problems. So let's talk about a few of those. On the trees and shrubs, again, that Cercospora leaf spot on hydrangea will be coming in. We always have to mention Phytophthora armillaria root rots as problems when you see unthriftiness, when you see decline, when you see dieback. Don't forget about the roots, including nematodes, as we saw with the boxwoods, but they can be on other things as well, such as gardenia, for example. Powdery mildews will continue. We talked about those before. Our crepe myrtles are just hammered with them now. You may see them on other species as such as dogwood, euonymus, the coathley, rose, spirea. Now, we haven't seen it yet, but July will be when we'll first start seeing the bacterial leaf sport symptoms, that marginal necrosis, often with a sort of a multicolor, irregular border to the green leaf tissue closer toward the midrib and toward the petiole. And that is typical on the red oak group. We also sometimes see it on sycamore. Well, it's pretty common on sycamore too. And occasionally you may see it on redbud. That is a systemic disease. Nothing you can do about it. It is internal in the xylem of the plant. The tree will leaf out fine each year, and then midsummer the symptoms will show up. Although interestingly, we did see a few symptoms last year on our local infected redbud here. Another disease of high summer is slime flux, and I probably shouldn't call it a disease. I should call it a condition. It's when the wood develops a condition called wetwood from bacterial colonization that, by producing gases, pressurizes that sap, that fermenting sap, and it oozes out in a frothy mix. White oak is very typically affected, but other hardwoods as well. And with white oak, it's almost always very low to the ground, close to the root flares there. So there's really nothing to be done here unless you've got some really loose bark that you want to remove, but you don't want to try or do any kind of treatments on this. A tree may flux one year and not the other. Roses, black spot will be coming on hard, as well as Passiflora leaf spot, which we talked about before. And rose rosette is something to always be watching for on our rose bushes, as well as, and I didn't list it because it's already up toward the top of armillaria root rot. Finally, the problems that we ourselves cause for our trees and shrubs, poor planting, either too deep or too shallow, plants that are root bound coming out of the nursery and didn't get proper treatment when they were planted. They can eventually lead to girdling roots, especially if things are planted or mulched too deeply. So always keep in mind that, that we are sometimes the cause of our plants suffering. In the fruit trees and shrubs, we already did get, we already got a picture, an image sample of some brown rot on peach, as you can see on the photo there in the upper middle, which will take off once those fruits get to ripening. And then you'll see too the sporulation of the fungus on the outside, scab on the picture on the upper right there, which we mentioned actually last time as well, can cause cracking in the fruit as it expands, while the infected spots do not. On the leaves of apple, cedar apple rust, I'll show a picture in a moment here of something like that. Frog eye leaf spot. And on the fruit, black rot, which is the same fungus as called the frog eye leaf spot, but also bitter rot, which you see in the photograph there, lower picture there of the apple. Sooty blotch and fly speck, you can see a little bit of fly speck there as well, but that is a cosmetic issue and not something that's going to affect really the quality of the apple unless you're trying to sell it. Cane blight on blackberry could be something that you might come across. And on bunch grapes, black rot now on the developing fruit and downy mildew. Now this black rot is not the same as the black rot that's on apple. It's a different fungus. And it reminds me to mention that back in 2015, when we did our year specializing in diagnosis, the October program was dedicated to fruits, diagnosing problems in fruits. So if you're interested in more in depth on those, then you can go back and refer to that recording. Muscadine grape is interesting. It does not get downy mildew, fortunately, but when it gets black rot, it gets it as a leaf spot. Here was a sample that came in just yesterday, and the clear, bright orange spots with yellow borders indicate that it's some kind of a gymnosperrangium rust, crabapple in this case. But what was interesting is that the E-seal state had not developed on the underside. So I can't say for sure that this was cedar apple rust, but it's certainly in that genus, and it will eventually be developing the spore state, the E-seal state we call it, that will, if it's lucky, blow over to a juniper and continue the cycle that way. This has to cycle between juniper and a rosaceous host. In the vegetable garden, multiple species. We're going to have to consider the possibility of root knot nematodes. There's the photo I warned you about in the lower right there. That's on okra, but there are a lot of things, beets, beans, of course, tomatoes, cucumbers that can get that, many different vegetables. And we may start seeing now some southern stem blight, which the astute viewer will notice that that's not an actual vegetable plant there in the lower left, but it shows you that mycelium of the Sclerotium rolfsii, the southern stem blight fungus there that can develop under high humidity. But if you're seeing wilting, that's one thing to look for, is that decay at the base of the main stem. Tomato, we can get into some nutritional deficiencies. Blossom end rot, of course, developing fruit with a calcium deficiency, and the yellowing, interveinal yellowing of the lower leaves, it indicates a magnesium deficiency. As before, leaf spots on tomato, we get some bacterial leaf spots, some septoria, some tomato spotted wilt virus, which is that upper left photo we showed last time, but now I've added the photo of the tomato with the nice ring spots on the fruit, which is another indication that you have tomato spotted wilt virus. Wilting tomatoes, not only your root knot and your southern blight, but the possibility that bacterial wilt is there in the soil and has affected the plants is something that you have to consider. As of last week, downy mildew on cucurbits has been confirmed in North Carolina. It does not overwinter here. It has to arrive each year from points south. And it was confirmed as of the 15th. It's clade 2. I've never actually talked about or used this term clades, but in the cucurbit downy mildew, there's the clade 2, which is going to tend toward the cucumbers and the cantaloupes, versus clade 1, which is going to be more on your pumpkin, squash, and watermelon. So we know we have clade 2 of the cucurbit downy mildew in the state now, so be on the lookout for those angular yellow spots on the cucumbers and less angular on the cantaloupe. And you may see the kind of darkish, smoky sporulation on the underside if you get the high humidity conditions for sporulation. Powdery mildew, of course, very different critter, but you'll be seeing that especially on the squash and the pumpkin as season wears on. Anthracnose and gummy stem blight are a couple other fungal cucurbit diseases to be on the lookout for. And wrapping it up with turf, the brown patch, as the tall fescue gets stressed by the heat, is going to be a problem. Lower right picture there. Fairy ring, any month, any turf grass. Gray leaf spot on fescue or St. Augustine grass would be another bolo for us in the turf, as well as Pythium blight. You can see in the inset photo there at the bottom how you may, under the humid conditions, actually see the the webbing of the mycelium of the Pythium there. Summer patch, and it's not a disease, but chinch bugs, which may look superficially like a disease symptom there, affecting St. Augustine grass. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see the chat.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. We have a couple of questions in the chat, but in the interest of time, if you might take a look at those while Charlotte does the announcements, that would be wonderful. And if we want to come back to anything after the announcements, we'll do that.
All right, meantime, I will try and share in the chat some responses to those.
Thank you. That would be great. All right, Charlotte, send it to you. We can't hear you just yet, though, Charlotte. So perhaps start over with your announcement slides.
Yes, I was talking away and on mute. Thank you for catching that. All right, couple of things coming up. Next Tuesday, can I use this image? This is a really important question, and I've actually heard from 2 different Master Gardener volunteers in the state in the last few weeks, just kind of randomly, that they had received fines for using images that they did not have, the rights to use. So this webinar is all about what you can use and what you need to know about using images when you post information online for extension. If you're having a plant sale and you use images, just any kind of questions around copyright law and using images in our work through extension. So hope you can join us next Tuesday. June 29th at 1 o'clock, we'll be joined by Will Cross, who's the Director of Copyright and Digital Scholarship at NC State Libraries. Also, the J.C. Ralston Arboretum continues to have a wonderful lineup of now in-person events as well as online events. So be sure to visit their website and go to the events and the calendar to learn about things they have coming up. I've listed some of the upcoming online opportunities that don't have a charge. There are also some courses you can sign up for that may have a registration fee. But this one tomorrow, I think I need to attend tomorrow, June 23rd at 3 o'clock, and it's about taming tall perennials. So how to keep those tall, beautiful flowering perennials from falling over. So be sure to check their calendar for more options. There are upcoming plant ID courses you can sign up for. Starting July 12th, there'll be the full range, the new one on houseplants, succulents, and cacti, as well as the new one that's just focused on vegetables, herbs, fruits, and nuts. Then the annuals, perennials, ground covers, and vines that's been offered before, as well as the trees, shrubs, and conifers that's been offered before. Of course, these are led by Laura Barth and offered in partnership with Longwood Gardens. So encourage you to check out those and learn more about them and sign up. It's a great time to learn about these plants. There is a discount for Master Gardener volunteers and extension professionals, and you can learn about that on the link that we've included for the site itself, for the classes themselves. Also starting July 12th, Introduction to Therapeutic Horticulture. This is an online course that is offered in partnership with North Carolina Botanical Gardens, and you can go online and find all the details. This one's a little more expensive, but there is also a discount for volunteers. And this one is a repeat of the course that was offered last year and earlier this year, and it's a prerequisite to a follow-up course. So there's going to be a second part. This was the Introduction to Therapeutic Horticulture, so the next course is going to take you deeper into therapeutic horticulture. And if you're interested in that second course, be sure that you take this one first, because it will be a prerequisite for the follow-up, the more in-depth course. And the International Master Gardener Conference is getting closer, September 12th through 17th. It will be virtual, so if you haven't registered yet, registration is definitely still open, and encourage you to check that out and think about being part of that coming up in September. Then I'm going to turn it back over to see if there are any other questions in chat that Mike or Matt need to address, but just want to let everybody know our next month Plants, Pests, and Pathogens will be having a guest speaker, Dr. Michelle Schroeder-Moreno, and she'll be talking about soil mycorrhizae, which has been a topic. I know there's been a lot of discussion around that on some of our agent chat groups, and just a really fascinating topic about something we can all do to help our soils be healthier, and that makes our plants healthier. So I hope you can join us next month, July 27th. And I see Mike is taking care of the questions in the chat. about the rust on rhododendron. Was there any other last comments either of you guys wanted to make?
No, Mike's doing a great job responding to those. So we're in good shape.
All right, very good. And Caroline mentioned earlier, we'll send the follow-up email that has links to the resources we've mentioned and some of the slides we've shared today. So I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, great rest of the week, July 4th holiday. We look forward to seeing you later next month.
Take care,
Play our
everybody.
music. Yeah, thank you, Matt and Mike. Thank you, Caroline. Play our music to send us out, and we'll go ahead and stop the recording.